Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Salam. Welcome to MACFEST 2025, another fantastic event. Tell us in the chat where you're watching us from. Just say hello, for example, hello from New York, hello from America, hello from France, we're saying, hello from the UK. We've got a very exciting event today. Those of you who are subscribed to the newsletter, you have received a heads up. It's absolutely fascinating topic, but it's not my part to actually give you any more information today. Before we start, just a little reminder, we've got the MACFEST Arts Awards process open, and we have extended the deadline until mid-June. So if you are a Muslim artist or creative, you've got to be based in the UK, and your works qualify into one of the four disciplines, painting, drawing, calligraphy, or photography, you can go to MACFEST website and submit up to 2 artworks for free. Now, our host for today is Shamim Chowdhury. She's a journalist and a writer with more than 20 years experience. As a foreign correspondent, she's covered wars in Syria, Iraq, and Ukraine, as well as the refugee crisis, natural disasters, and elections from all over the world. She's also a writer, having written for publications including The Independent, Middle East Eye, NPR, Al Jazeera English, and more. Welcome, Shamim. Over to you.
Thank you, Katarzyna, for the lovely introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from all around the world. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to MACFEST 2025. Now, for those of you who have attended MACFEST before, you'll know that it's an internationally acclaimed, multi-award winning 6-month-long celebration of Muslim art and culture. Now, it's held at venues across the northwest of England where it's based, but it's also streamlined to a global audience. And for those of us who are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. The festival, if you go onto its website, I will put it in the link, it is www.macfest.com, showcases some of the most talented creatives from the Muslim world. Included are artists, musicians, historians, photographers, sculptors, and much, much more. This year alone, there are more than 80 events. Some of them are in person and others, like this one, are online. As Katarzyna said, my name is Shamim Chowdhury. I'm a journalist with a background in TV, print, and radio, and I am delighted to be your host for the next hour and a half. I'm particularly thrilled to be joined by the academic historian and author, Professor Siobhan Lambert-Hurley. Siobhan's area of expertise is global history. She teaches that at the University of Sheffield, and she specializes in women, gender, and Islam in South Asia. She completed her BA in Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, and her PhD in History at SOAS, that's the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. She's written many, many papers. She's a multi-talented woman, authored several books, and her most recent project is on female literacy in South Asia and preserving traditional food knowledge in India. And hopefully during this session, we'll get a chance to ask her some questions about that. But in the meantime, today, as Katarzyna mentioned, we're going to be exploring her remarkable book entitled Muslim Women, Reform and Princely Patronage, Nawab Sultan Jahan, who was the Begum of Bhopal. It's the story of a Muslim woman who ruled under the Indian princely state of Bhopal from 1901 to 1926 during British rule. And I urge all of you to try and get a copy of it. I was intrigued when I read it, and I really learnt. I learned so much about Muslim women readers, and it was so inspirational. And I know that all of you in the audience today will gain so much from it. So today, to explain a little bit about how today's session is going to work, in a few moments, I'm going to hand over to Siobhan, and she will speak for about half an hour or so, half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we will open it up to the audience to take some questions. So as Katarzyna mentioned, I just want to reiterate, please share your questions in the chat and we will try to get through as many as we can. They don't even have to be questions. They can just be observations or comments, anything you'd like to say. If you just want to say hello, just say hello. And we will make sure that you get mention. And also do let us know where you're tuning in from. Are you in Turkey? Are you in some part of Africa? Are you in the US? We would love to know. Now, without any further ado, let's get into it. Siobhan, it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do hold up your book before you start your session so that everyone can take a look. And it's over to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Shamim. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate your very kind and generous introduction today. I'm really excited to be part of MACFEST again. I did an event for MACFEST a couple of years ago, and it's just such a fantastic organization, does so much good, and I'm really pleased to be participating today. So I'm just going to go over to share some slides now, which will accompany my talk today. I've tried to bring in as many images as I can, just because I think there's some wonderful historic pictures, and hopefully that'll just kind of keep everyone interested as I'm sharing a little bit of information about this book and this topic today. So 1 minute, please. I will go over here. Wonderful. Can I just check, Shamim, you can see those okay?
Not so far, but maybe I need to wait a couple of seconds. Now I can, yes.
Okay, great. I can't seem to see anything but my slides. So if there's anything that needs that you need to say to me, please just like interrupt and say it. So
I will.
That would be great. Excellent. So as was said, my topic for today is Woman Muslim Ruler, the Life and Writings of Nawab Sultan Jahan Begum of Bhopal. And I'd actually like to start today with an image. I said I was going to show lots of images, and I'm going to start with that. This is an image of the princes of India around the time of the Delhi Durbar in 1912. And that was an event that was really intended to celebrate the coronation of George V as the Emperor of India. And if you look closely at this image in front of you, you'll notice that there are kind of rows and rows of men with their...
What a saga today. We have a lovely morning, afternoon, and then suddenly find we've been caught up with that. Okay.
You need to, I'm going to mute you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so we can see here, as I said, rows and rows of men with their kind of ceremonial headgear, their smart suits or their sherwani. And then if you look at the front row, of course, you'll see a single anomaly. And that is, of course, this veiled woman in the front row, covered from head to toe in her burqa. And of course, the question may come to you, who is this veiled figure in the front row? And that brings me to another image and also a poem, which I think really will allow me to introduce this Muslim woman ruler, who is very much going to be the focus of my talk today, and really show how she was defined by each of the identities that I started with. So again, if you look on the left hand of my screen, you'll see I've given you a kind of full page spread out of a magazine or a newspaper called The Graphic, which was a weekly illustrated newspaper, which was published from London. If you look very closely, you'll see that it's dated the 4th of January, or 3rd of January, sorry, 2014. So just a couple years after the Delhi Durbar of the last picture. And you'll see
we need to move the slide,
the only
please.
woman ruler in India, Her Highness the Begum of Bhopal. And of course, this is the very same woman that we saw veiled in the previous image. Her full title, as I probably indicated already, was Nawab Sultan Jahan Begum. And she was a figure who ruled the princely state of Bhopal in central India She did so from her accession to the throne when she was, I guess, the fairly mature age of 43 in 1901, and she ruled it until she abdicated to her son, Hamidullah Khan, 25 years later in 1926. She actually abdicated before she passed away. She passed away in 1930. Now, I've paired this quite imperial image, I think, that really recognized her as a ruler with, on the other side of this slide, the concluding stanzas of a poem. And this was a poem originally written in Urdu. You see, I've given you here on the slide an image of the Urdu original, as well as the English translation. And this was a poem which was called Chup Ki Dad, or Homage to the Silent. Perhaps it's familiar to some of you. It was written by the modernist poet Altaf Hussein Hali quite early in Sultan Jahan's reign, around 1905. And I've chosen this poem because I think it's quite an interesting one to highlight a theme that was recurrent in many kind of reformist writings of this time. So it suggested how women were, and I quote, the true strength of the Muslim home, but it said that they had been deprived their rights, they had been deprived knowledge, and it was as a result of this that the whole Muslim community was in decline. And so the point of this poem really was to point to the necessity of Muslim women in particular being given education. And in the two stanzas that I've given you here, you'll see that it is Sultan Jahan herself who is being recognized for her contribution to this cause. So we see here how she's being recognized as this very prominent socio-religious reformer. And the reason, you see that it refers to the patronage of Sultan Jahan, it was because she had supported a Muslim girls' school that was founded at the reformist center of Aligarh in North India in around 1905. And basically the aim of this bit of the poem was to suggest that this whole project couldn't have been achieved without her backing, both because of her monetary and her intellectual support, but also because of the legitimacy that she bestowed on it as a princely ruler. So I give you this because this is the remarkable woman that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to talk about her as a ruler, as a reformer, as a woman, as a Muslim, as a ruler. And as was suggested at the beginning by Shamim, I'm going to be doing so by drawing on my first book, which was actually published quite a long time ago now. It was published way back in 2007. And you can see the cover there on the left hand of your screen. But I'm also going to be drawing on some work I've done a bit subsequently on histories of autobiography, histories of travel writing, as well as my current project, which, as Shamim said, is on everyday eating in Muslim South Asia. The fact that I'm drawing on these books that I've written throughout my career probably suggests that Sultan Jahan herself is a rather larger than life figure. She's very much kind of stayed with me through my career as a whole. But before we come to Sultan Jahan, let me give you first a little bit of background. Now, I've talked to this point about her as a princely ruler. And I thought before I go any further, I should kind of explain a little bit for those who are not necessarily familiar with this context. So you'll see that I've flipped now to a map of India in the high colonial period. And you'll notice that this is a map that is in two colors. So it's pink on one hand and yellow on the other. The area that is pink reflects areas that were directly ruled by the British Crown, while the yellow areas point to those areas that were known as princely India. Now, the yellow areas look quite solid on the map, but in fact, they captured over 600 principalities that continued to exist in India in the colonial period. And these were principalities that had been formed as a result of so-called treaties of friendship and cooperation, which had been signed in the late 18th and early 19th century between local rulers who had perhaps established kind of independent polities in the post-Mughal period and the East India Company. It's amazing how much of this map is yellow, if you like. And I think it points to the fact that it was these princes that actually ruled 2/5 of the area and 1/3 of the population of the British Indian Empire. Important to recognize that they were really varied in size and influence. So some of these polities were just tiny estates of around an acre of a land. Others were vast polities that had really quite complex political and economic institutions. So if you look towards the bottom of my map, you'll see the state of Hyderabad, for instance, in South India. This was roughly the size of modern France. So it gives you a sense of just how big and important these states were. I probably suggested already, these states were semi-autonomous. So they had their own rulers, they had their own systems of law, they even had their own rudimentary military forces. But of course, they recognized the suzerainty of the British Crown, and it was to the British Crown that they handed over control of their foreign affairs. Now, again, if you look at this map quite closely, right in the middle of it, you'll see that I've circled in red the state of Bhopal, somewhere near the center of my map. You'll notice it's nowhere near as big as Hyderabad. Indeed, it was known as what I guess we call a middling princely state. It was basically carved out of the very fertile Malwa plateau in central India. In colonial records of the time, we can see the parallels that are being made in that it's often described as being roughly the size of Yorkshire, if that helps people to imagine it, and reflects that it was around 7,000 square miles in size. Now I'm going to zoom in now to another map, which is actually a map of Bhopal state itself.
Recording in progress.
And we can see that in terms of its population, this was an area that was home to roughly 700,000 people. Over half of those people were described as cultivators of the soil, which really points, I guess, to this state's agricultural base. The second largest group were artisans of some sort. And this was a state, too, that was very divided in religious terms. So the population was roughly 72% Hindu and 12% Muslim. But in urban areas, including Bhopal city, which you see in the middle of the map here, the population was around 54% Muslim. So this shows how Muslims were identified in this state with government and high status pursuits. And of course, as I've noted already, the ruler, too, was a Muslim. So this was the territory that Sultan Jahan ruled as an autocratic ruler for around 25 years. Now, you may be thinking, how did this situation come about? How do we create a situation with a veiled Muslim ruler at the helm? And I guess what's perhaps even more remarkable in this story is that she was actually the fourth generation of Muslim woman to rule this state. So she actually acceded the throne on the death of her mother, Shah Jahan, who you see on the left of my screen here. And she had acceded the throne on the death of her mother, Sikandar, who you see in the center bottom. And she had acceded the throne on the death of her mother, Qudsiya Begum. So the state of Bhopal was really remarkable in that it was actually ruled by women for over 100 years, from 1819 right through to 1926. And again, you may be thinking, how does this happen? How does this come about? And I guess the simple answer is it was a kind of a combination of historical accident on one hand and the quality of their administration on the other. So the rule by women was actually initiated when the first Begum, Qudsiya, she actually was named as regent for her infant daughter when her husband was killed accidentally in a shooting accident in 1819. So it was this accident that sets everything in motion. The idea was that Qudsiya would just be the regent until Sikandar came of age and married, at which point Sikandar's husband was to become the Nawab. And indeed he did. Her husband, Jahangir, came to the throne in 1837. So there's a little window here of male rule. He, unfortunately, for the state and for himself, was both a drunkard and an opium addict. He died after just 7 years. And thus the situation repeated itself. So Sikandar was named regent for her daughter. And indeed, each generation just kept producing one daughter. So each of these women were the single daughter, single living child of their mother. This occurred until Sultan Jahan, the last of these women, actually gave birth to sons, at which point her son became the heir apparent and of course led to a male succession. But perhaps interesting to note too that Sultan Jahan's son also had only daughters. And so if it had not been for Indian independence, for the dissolution of the princely states at that time, he would have been succeeded by a woman too. And I thought just to bring you to that latest generation, I've given you here on the slide an image of the last Nawab of Bhopal, which is Hamidullah Khan. He's right on the left there in the tails and top hat. And this is a picture of him with his wife, Maimuna Begum, and his 3 daughters in London in the 1930s. And it was his eldest daughter, Abida Sultan, who is at the top right corner, who was actually named his heir apparent. When she actually migrated to Pakistan in the late 1940s, her sister Sajida, who you see at the bottom right, then became the Nawab in name, because by that point the state didn't exist. Sajida Sultan may be familiar to some of you if you're film buffs, because she was a wife of the cricketing Nawab of Pataudi, and she's also the grandmother of the actor Saif Ali Khan. So this is the family from which that actor descends.
So Siobhan, I'm going to jump in just for a second here.
Yes, please do.
Because I know that many members of our audience have just joined. I think there may have been a very slight technical issue. So they missed the the beginning of the introduction. So I'm just going to very quickly remind them what you're talking about, so they're up to speed. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're sorry that there was a very slight technical hitch, but you haven't missed much. Siobhan has been fascinating so far, but she's still got loads to tell us, so I've no doubt that you will catch up very, very quickly. As a reminder, I am thrilled to be joined by the academic historian and author, Professor Siobhan Lambert-Hurley, who is a professor of global history at the University of Sheffield. Now, today we are talking about, or rather she is explaining to us about her book entitled Muslim Women, Reform and Princely Patronage, Nawab Sultan Jahan, who was the Begum of Bhopal. So Bhopal was a princely state. It still retains its name, but we're talking about a time between 1901 and 1926 when much of India was under British rule. She was a pioneer, first of her kind, to make many, many reforms, many changes across India, and that is what Siobhan is telling us about. Fascinating subject. And I do want to say, for those of us who have just joined, please put your comments in the chats and tell us where you're from. And if you have any questions at all, once Siobhan has finished her session, she will be taking questions, and we would really love audience participation. So don't be shy. And if you don't want me to read your name, I won't, but of course I would prefer it if I did. But I'll leave it up to you. So Siobhan, thank you so much for letting me butt in right there. There's so many things. I mean, I was fascinated by the map of India. Just one observation. For those who have just joined, Siobhan started off by showing a map of what was then British India and how it was split, and so much of it was actually princely states, because we all get this idea that British India was all owned by the British, but that wasn't the case. And I think that kind of laid the foundation for Sultan Nawaz to kind of find her feet and come to the fore. So what are your thoughts on that? And also do continue.
Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry that everybody, I can see from the comments in the chat that quite a few of you have joined a little bit late, and I'm sorry that you missed the introduction. It was really the intention of my introduction to kind of give you a sense of how this princely ruler, Sultan Jahan, actually is able to come to rule. And as Shamim was just saying, in one hand, it's something to do with the way in which India is governed in this period. So at the period that I'm talking about, around the turn of the 20th century, would it be helpful if I go back to that map, Shamim? Yeah. maybe?
Yeah, let's just, give the
Coop.
audience a visual sense of the locality.
Oh.
And it was fascinating, as I said, to be made aware of just how much of India as we know it today was princely states rather than owned by the British. This is, it was quite a revelation for me, and I'm sure it will be for many of the people in our audience.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out again how to get back there. I seem to have lost everything that I had before. Ah, there we go. So slide, I'll go. So this is the slide I was on, but I will go back to where I was, which is this one here. So I was just sort of explaining about Bhopal and how it kind of existed in the colonial period. And what I was explaining was that a number of local rulers who had perhaps become independent in the post-Mughal period in India, that many of them signed what were called treaties of friendship and cooperation. Little friendship, but in any case, in the late 18th and 19th century. And they'd signed those with the East India Company, and it was because of those that they continued to exist. And I was noting that actually this area is massive, as you can see on the map. All of the areas in yellow, it included about 2/5 of the area of India and 1/3 of the population of British India. And it's really because of this system of semi-autonomous rulers that we are able to have a ruler like Sultan Jahan, who I'm going to be speaking about today, who is able to kind of use her state, if you like, to introduce reforms and try out ideas, and often try out ideas and introduce reforms before they were done in British India. And so very often things that are kind of started in her state then are exported to other parts of India as well. I was noting too that the population of this small state, there's a map of the state of Bhopal there, that it was largely agrarian, but it was also quite divided in religious terms. So the population was roughly 72% Hindu, 12% Muslim, but urban areas were very dominated by Muslims, largely because of their identification with government and high status pursuits, because the ruler of the state was Muslim as well. I moved on from there just to speak about the dynasty of Muslim female rulers in this state. So here is, I mean, it's remarkable that we have this veiled Muslim woman ruling a state in the early part of the 20th century, perhaps even more remarkable in that she was actually the fourth woman to rule the state. And I was suggesting there was kind of two reasons. One was because of historical accident, in that all of these women only had daughters, so they passed on the rule from daughter to daughter, but also because they were really excellent rulers. And I think that's about where I had got to, wasn't it, Shamim?
Yes, I think so, yes. I hope that makes sense to everyone. It's well, not in any way to suggest that, Siobhan, you're not making sense, but obviously some people have joined slightly later than we had originally hoped, so they missed the introduction, but yes, I think hopefully now everyone's caught up. And we're not through. Siobhan isn't anywhere near through her talk yet, so there are many
just started, Shamim.
well, that's great. So it means that the latecomers will be able to, haven't missed all the really fascinating stuff that you're going to go into. So don't fret, we're all here now. And just a quick reminder, everyone, please leave your comments and please leave questions, because we do want this session to be interactive. And once Siobhan has finished her presentation, we will make sure that we get to as many of you as we can. And once again, do tell us where you're listening from. I think we even have people from as far afield as Bangladesh and Turkey. So wonderful. We would love to hear from you. So do leave your comments. Siobhan, do carry on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I was just, as I said, I was just talking about this dynasty of female rulers that there was in Bhopal. And I just was noting that one of the reasons that they were able to continue ruling the state of Bhopal was because they proved themselves, one, to be really great administrators, but also because they were really canny, basically. I was speaking about Sultan Jahan's grandmother, and that's the woman that you see seated in the middle of this image here, flanked by two of her ministers. This is the second female ruler of Bhopal, Sikandar Begum. She really gained the support of the British for her rule, one, by being a good administrator, and two, by demonstrating her loyalty to the British crown during the 1857 rebellion. So while many princely rulers were rising up against the British state, she decided her bread was buttered with the British state, and she was richly rewarded for her loyalty, one, with territory, and two, by actually being made the only female knight in the British Empire besides Queen Victoria herself. And it's very much this woman who was a kind of model, if you like, for Sultan Jahan's own rule. So I'd like to turn to the rule of Sultan Jahan now. So I noted already, for those of you who were here, that Nawab Sultan Jahan, who you see in the middle picture of my slide now, she acceded the throne in 1901 on the death of her mother. It was at that point that she was given the title of Nawab to indicate her status as ruler. Her husband, who you see on the left here, her husband was called Ahmed Ali Khan. He was named Nawab Consort, and her eldest son, who you see on the right, Nasrullah, was named heir apparent. I've referred a little bit already to one of her other children, and perhaps this is a good point to note that she was actually the mother of 5 children. So by this point, she'd already given birth 5 times. But very sadly, 4 of her children actually predeceased her. And that explains why it was not Nasrullah who actually succeeded her, but instead her youngest son, Hamidullah, who's in the center of my slide here, as I noted before. Perhaps notable too, her husband also died very soon after her accession. So she came to the throne in 1901. He died in 1902. And I think that accounts for why very early in her reign, she was often portrayed in the way that you see in the picture on your screen now. So this is an image, as you see, of Her Highness the Begum with her 3 sons, Nasrullah, Obaidullah, and Hamidullah, as well as her grandchildren of the time. I think this picture's around 1907. Now, undoubtedly, she talks in her autobiography, I'll come to that in a minute, but she talks in her autobiography about the great tragedy of losing her husband so early in her reign, her helpmeet, if you like. But I think it's kind of important for her rule too, because it suggests that she had a much kind of freer reign, if you like, than she would have had otherwise, to craft her own agendas, to kind of forge her own path. Interestingly, from the point of view of the colonial state, they thought that when her husband died, that she might step back from rule, and that would give them a kind of an opportunity to kind of step in and overhaul the administration. Sultan Jahan was clearly a woman. She was not going to have any of that. She indeed made it clear right from the start that she intended to administer the state without the interference of the colonial state, without even the aid of a chief minister. And she immediately started introducing all sorts of administrative reforms in Bhopal. Because she was kind of known in her own time as this reforming queen, if you like, also because she continued to express very loudly her loyalty to the British crown, she was, again, like her grandmother, richly rewarded by the British government. So I've given you a picture here of Sultan Jahan very late in her life. I think this picture was probably taken sometime in the late 1920s. And you can see that she's, in this picture, has all of her imperial honors on display. So she was named Grand Commander of the Indian Empire in 1904. She was Knight Grand Commander of the Star of India in 1910, Commander of India in 1911, and Grand Dame of the British Empire in 1917. So very much a kind of fetid finger, if you like, at the time of the colonial empire. Now, I've talked a little bit about her as a writer already, but I also wanted to highlight that despite having all these kind of onerous duties of ruling a state, that Sultan Jahan was also a prolific author. And I've just on the slide here given you only a small selection, actually, of the texts that she wrote. She did speak some English, but actually her day-to-day language was Urdu, and all of her texts were composed in that language. But as you can see here, many of her texts were then translated into English as well, by family members or local British officers. And if any of you are interested, a lot of them are available on sources like archive.org and that sort of thing. So you can always follow up and read some of them later if you'd like to. The first text that she actually publishes, I thought I'd draw your attention to it because it's quite an interesting one. It was composed very soon after her accession, when in October of 1903, in the wake of her husband's death, actually, she decided to undertake a 5-month pilgrimage to the Hijaz. And I wanted to flag this too, because I think it really gives this sort of sense of her as this quite devout Muslim. Worth noting that in going on Hajj at this time, she actually again followed in the footsteps of her grandmother, Sikandar, who had been the first Indian ruler to go on Hajj in the early 1860s, and who also wrote an account of it, an incredibly acerbic account, which I absolutely love. Sultan Jahan's own account, as you can see on the left of my screen here, was first published in Urdu, but it actually achieved probably wider circulation in English translation, as The Story of a Pilgrimage to Hijaz. That was published in 1909. Interesting thing about this text, I said it shows her as a devout Muslim, but actually in this text, she talks less about kind of spiritual matters and much more about the kind of practical arrangements for her journey as a veiled woman and the honors that were bestowed upon her as a traveling prince. So there's real scrupulous detail in this text about things like ceremonials and purdah arrangements. So this was her first book. Among her next publications were a number of biographies. You can see a number of biographies here of her close relations, of her mother, of her grandmother, of her father. And as I indicated already, she also wrote an account of her own life, indeed called An Account of My Life, which was also composed in Urdu, but again, better known probably under the English title. It was written in 3 volumes. You can see I've just given you volume 1 here. And this is such a fascinating autobiographical text because it really captures the quite unusual life experiences of a veiled female ruler, but also really enables us as historians to kind of have quite unique insight into her own self-representation. So how she wanted herself to be seen, if you like, by the public. So there was all these kind of auto/biographical writings, but what I would say of most of her writings is that they were really, I guess what we would say, reformist in nature. And what I mean by this is they were really kind of advocating ways that the Muslim community could be strengthened from within to face the very real challenge of British colonial rule in India. And what I've argued in my book and elsewhere is that was very definitive about Sultan Jahan is that she was very sensitive to the kind of mores of the Muslim community, and she was very pragmatic in her approach. So she was always looking for ways that she could kind of build on existing models, on existing colonial models, on existing Islamic models, with the aim of bringing incremental change for women in particular. And I think she really had this idea that if she did anything too dramatic, it would either bring on the ire of the colonial state, or it would bring on the ire of more conservative sections of the Muslim community.
Dawn, I'm going to jump in there again for a moment.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'll pause there and see if Shameen wants to ask it.
We can read each other's minds. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's everything that you're saying is incredible, and it's raising many, many questions in my mind that I would love you to expand on once your session is over. And I've no doubt that many people in the audience are feeling the same. And in fact, I've already got some really great questions from members of the audience, which I will put to you. But on a completely different note, I'm just in awe of the photographs. I mean, they're just stunning, aren't they? And they're just so beautiful. And also their costumes. As someone who loves Indian clothes, and I can see where, you know, the historical kind of links between what we wear and what our generations before us would wear. I can really see that connection, and they look so regal and so kind of lavish in their clothes. Is that something you can shed a little bit of light on before you go back to go back to explaining her life to us? Hello? Hello? Hello there.
Hi, Shamim. I can't
Hi.
see Siobhan.
Right. Am I still, you still have connection with me though, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
That's fine, perfectly fine. We
Okay.
can discuss further until she joins us. She'll be joining us. She's probably had tech issue.
Yes, that's probably
All right.
what it
Okay.
was.
Well, we will, I think we've just, she's back.
She's back.
She's back. Thank you everyone
Excellent.
for your patience. Technology is, as we all know, can be an ass, but we just have to bear with it, and we can now continue because she's back. I don't know if you heard, I don't know if you heard my question, but I was just commenting on their clothes. So I'm just enthralled by these incredible photographs. I love old photographs, and their costumes, their clothes have really stood out to me. I mean, I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that before you move on to
Yeah, I absolutely can. And I'm so sorry about that. Literally, our power went off and my computer turned off.
it happens.
So
It happens. And you know, our
it
audience
happens. I'm back
has
now.
already been very, very patient, and I'm sure they will understand. So the show
It
must
just
go on.
flickered. I had to start it again. Anyway, I'm back. So yeah, the clothing is really interesting, I think. There was a real effort in Bhopal state, particularly in the 19th century, to encourage women to wear clothing that was I guess, practical for moving around. And particularly the women who ruled the state in the 19th century, you know, they were very much kind of traveling around a lot on horseback. They were active in their state. And so the sort of traditional wear in Bhopal from that period that they kind of instigated was to wear very tight, like churidar pajamas, and then a quite loose flowing kind of top, tunic kind of thing. And that was meant that then women would have more movement and would have the means of kind of taking part in quite active pursuits in the state. You could see from some of the images that I showed that this wasn't always what they were wearing by the early 20th century. Sultan Jahan herself seems to wear this kind of adapted, kind of half English, half Indian attire. I think that's very much reflecting that she very much kind of looked upon figures like Queen Victoria as a sort of model for her. So she was sort of very much kind of adapting, just as she was adapting colonial ideas in her reformist practices, also kind of adapting English clothing into her kind of dress sense as well. There's a wonderful account in an autobiography which was written by a woman who lived in the state in the early part of the 20th century. And her mother was from Lucknow, and she wore the very flowing, long trousers that was I've just forgotten the name of them now, but the particular pajamas that were sort of worn by especially elite women in Lucknow at that time. And Sultan Jahan apparently said to her, how do you expect yourself to be able to do anything wearing those very long, these very loose fitting long trousers, wear these sensible churidar pajamas, and then you'll be able to move about more freely. So it's really interesting, I think, the link between clothing and actually the kind of reformist ideals that are being put forward for women in this period.
Thank you so much for that. Now do continue with
yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a sidebar, but I'm sure
it was, and I hadn't built dress into the talk, so I'm glad that you asked that question. So I'm just going to share my screen again, and then we can... So Shamim, just let me know when you can see the slides again.
So I think we're still on the previous one where it's a picture of her.
Okay, so I'm going to move. You can see now? Education?
Not so far. Yes, so there's a quote.
Yeah, good. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's where I wanted to be.
Perfect.
Excellent, thanks. What I wanted to do in the next part of my talk now is really look at some of the themes in Sultan Jahan's writings and also talk about how they related to some of the more practical initiatives that she undertook in her state and elsewhere. And I've picked out 5 themes, one of which wasn't dress, as I noted, but I picked out education, veiling, health, women's rights, and diet. Whether I have time to go through all of them, we'll see. But I'll start and we can see how things go, really. So as the quote on the slide probably suggests, the one I wanted to start with was education. For those of you who weren't here right at the beginning of the talk, I spoke then about how Sultan Jahan was really held up by other members of the Muslim community in India in honor of the contributions that she made to female education. And this is really kind of underlined by what I want to say here as well. Sultan Jahan was really an outspoken advocate of female education. In fact, she thought it was even more important than men's education. And she said this on the basis that women really had this kind of pivotal role in the religious training of children. So this quote that I've given you on the slide here actually comes from a pamphlet that she wrote in 1911. And as you see, she says that she respects that men have done a great deal for our sex in the matter of education, but she says they have done much more for themselves, forgetting probably that our education was more important than theirs. And she goes on in this text to offer the analogy of the wheels of a cart. And so she sort of says, if the wheels of the cart, i.e. men and women, don't move forward at the same pace, then she says the overall progress of the cart, i.e. Muslim civilization as a whole, will be curbed. So she says it's not enough just to educate men. You need to educate men and women at the same pace so that they can move forward together. This led to her to establish, as early as 1903, her own school for elite Muslim girls in Bhopal, which was named after her. It's called the Sultania Girls' School, and you can see on the left hand of my slide here just the introduction, the entrance rather to that school. She followed it up in 1907 with a special school for elite Hindu girls in the state. And she then went on to not just establish schools for more elite members of her society, but also the sort of less fortunate, as she would have said as well. So she establishes a technical school for poor girls and women. And what's interesting about this is she really tries to teach these girls practical skills that would allow them to make their own living. So she was really thinking about how could she give poor girls, how could she give widows especially the means of financial independence. She also set up a whole number of other schools for girls and boys, also a library and a museum in Bhopal. And she wasn't just thinking of urban areas either, because she also established 50 village schools. Indeed, in 1920, she passed a Compulsory Education Act in Bhopal, which was intended to bring free and compulsory education to all children between 7 and 14. And as I suggested at the beginning of my talk, for those of you who were here, she also supported all sorts of endeavors outside the state as well. So almost every city in India has a girls' school that receives some kind of support or funding, patronage from this Nawab Begum. In terms of thinking about what she taught in these schools, I think it's interesting that she rejected more kind of traditional modes of education in India's Muslim community, what she described in her autobiography as learning by rote the oldest and moldiest books which their old and moldy teachers could supply, which I think is a wonderful quote. And instead, she tried to introduce a kind of new modern curriculum as she would have seen it. At the same time, she was very attentive to managing the fear of a new educated woman. So she was trying to kind of maintain certain elements of society in order that people wouldn't be scared of education. So she sought to maintain very strict purdah arrangements for her girls' schools. And she also really emphasized religious, moral, and practical education. And we can see this, she actually crafted her own curriculum for Anglo-vernacular girls' schools in the 1910s. And this really focused in quite minute detail on the moral virtues that a girl should imbibe. from honesty and courage to prudence and patriotism. And generally, I would say these girls' schools founded by Sultan Jahan really focused on what she saw as the skills a girl would need to be a good wife and a good mother. So they often taught things like sewing and cooking and bookkeeping and home nursing and those sorts of things. And I think that really kind of, I guess, exemplifies how she was trying to balance new ideas with conservative opinion. So she was always thinking, how can I make women to be better wives, better mothers, better Muslims? At the same time, by giving girls education, it had kind of unforeseen effects. So it really, for many of the girls that attended her schools, it opened up all sorts of doors to new opportunities, if you like. And so many of the girls who went to her schools then went on to have careers as doctors and teachers and take up all sorts of other areas that weren't expected. Shamim, did you want to say anything about education before I move on?
I mean, it's just raised so many questions, but I think I will leave them until the end.
Okay.
But once again, I will just to remind everyone, we have the pleasure of the company of Professor Siobhan Lambert-Hurley. She is talking about her book, Muslim Women, Reform and Princely Patronage. An incredibly remarkable woman, Nawab Sultan Jahan, who was the Begum or leader of the princely state of Bhopal. That's essentially what the book is about. We've heard about the incredible reforms she's made to Muslim women's education. There are a few other sections that Siobhan is going to summarize and run us through. And just to remind people to, I'm really getting some amazing questions, and I'm really excited about putting them to Siobhan at the end of the session. They're brilliant. So, we've really got a really kind of a very, kind of very interested crowd. They seem to be, and one that's very engaging. So thank you very much to all of those who have been typing your questions into the chats. The others who haven't, please do so. And just to say that we've got people from as far afield as Australia who are tuning in, which is wonderful. Also, this session lasts until 3:30 UK time, which is another 40 minutes or so. Hopefully, Siobhan, that should give you plenty of time to go through your other headings. I'm thinking if we have about 20 minutes or so for questions and for wrapping up and for ideas, then that should be plenty. But that gives you a clear 20 minutes now.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks, Shamim. And lovely to hear there's so many people out there listening. So the second topic that I wanted to talk about was veiling. I've highlighted that Sultan Jahan was a veiled ruler, and therefore it's probably not surprising that veiling was a topic she was especially interested in. I guess a really important intervention that she made into kind of contemporary debates over purdah observance in early 20th century India was the books that you see on my screen now. So in 1918, she published the book on the left called Iffat al-Muslimat. And this was later republished in a much more widely circulated English translation as Al-Hijab, or Why Purdah is Necessary. The title obviously gives it away, what she was arguing. It suggests how in this kind of debate over purdah observance in the early 20th century that she very much defended the idea of maintaining what she called strict purdah, by which a Muslim woman was only to leave the home for essential tasks wearing a veil that covered her whole person, including the hands and face. And I think what's interesting, though, and important here is that even though she made that argument, in some ways, by suggesting that women should wear a veil or a burqa, she was actually, in a way, giving women more mobility than they may have had otherwise. So she really argued that even if women wore the veil, even a full burqa, that she didn't see this as a hindrance to them undertaking all sorts of activities. So she didn't see it as a hindrance to higher education, to travel, to good health, to philanthropic work, to patriotic conduct, or even, of course, in her own case, ruling a state. And hence, for those of you who were here or weren't here, I opened this talk with a picture of an imperial gathering where she sat at the front, covered in a burqa. And I thought I would just go on to show a few more pictures of her here, kind of out and about in the early 20th century. And I think these images are quite important because they really, I think her visibility in these kind of imperial gatherings, in these images, was part of her showing that that women could be good rulers even from behind the veil. So this first set of pictures that I've got on the screen now, these were images from when the Viceroy, Lord Minto, visited the state of Bhopal in 1909. And again, you can see Sultan Jahan present in all of these images in her burqa. I particularly like the one on the left, actually, where you can see her and many of her female relatives also fully veiled. And then the Viceroy, Lady Minto, surrounded by her 4 grandsons in this image. The next picture is actually a picture when Sultan Jahan first traveled to Great Britain in 1911. She traveled ostensibly for the coronation of George V, though she also used that opportunity to gather ideas for reformist projects in her own state. And it was also at that time that she supported the mosque that had been established at Woking in Surrey. And that mosque, the Shah Jahan Mosque, had actually been funded by her mother. And she went to visit it on that occasion and trying to revitalize it as a place of worship for Muslims in Britain, particularly. Again, we see her wandering around London at that time in her burqa. I started the talk by talking about the Delhi Durbar, and there's a few more images of her at that event here. And then the final set of images I wanted to share with you are from the visit of the Prince, I put Princes, but I meant Prince of Wales to India in 1921. The Prince of Wales actually came to Bhopal at that time. These are images from his visit. And I particularly like the one at the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, where you can see her handing out cups at a polo match, which shows how she was kind of even, I guess, integrating with the public at that time. So I wanted to show you these because I think we can see how her views on purdah certainly influenced her own practice, but it also led to what I've called the institutionalization of purdah within her own state. So she established a whole range of institutions in Bhopal that were intended to allow women in purdah to still access both education and also entertainment. So just to give you a couple of examples, one institution she established was the Princess of Wales Ladies Club, which was established in Bhopal in 1909. We have a slightly grainy photo of it here on the right. It included both a hall and a garden, surrounded by a very high wall, I might note, within one of her palaces. And this club was really intended to give women of her state access to games, to amusements, to educational opportunities. Within this ladies' club, she even established a so-called school for mothers, where she taught the St. John's Ambulance curriculum. So this was one institution that was kind of meant to give women the opportunity to actually leave their homes, to meet with other women, and to have access to all sorts of opportunities. After her granddaughters acted as poppy sellers during another visit to London, she also set up a pack of purdah girl guides in Bhopal, not wearing a kilt, as you see here, but what she deemed a suitably modest attire of kurta, pajamas, and dupatta. And these purdah girl guides had a really important function in Bhopal by the 1920s. They had the role of kind of organizing and running various segregated events for women. So these included things like baby shows, women-only bazaars, sports tournaments, arts exhibitions, writing competitions, and even a cinema showing in the 1920s. So lots of things being done to kind of create this separate sphere for women to gain education and entertainment. And by creating that separate sphere as well, it also kind of opened up the opportunity for women to have employment as well, because if you had a girls-only school, it had to have female teachers. And if you had women's hospitals, then you had to have women's doctors and women nurses and all of this as well. So quite interesting, the kind of knock-on effect, I suppose, of creating this separate sphere in Bhopal. So that was the sort of second area I was going to talk about. The third area, I'm just going to touch on this really briefly. A third area that Sultan Jahan was particularly interested to introduce reform was health. And I think this points to how she explicitly intended to make women, and especially Muslim women, kind of familiar with basic health principles and remedies. And she did so with the idea of kind of giving them control over their own bodies. So give them control over their own bodily health, over the health of their families. And I guess that enabled them to kind of have some sort of agency, even within their kind of prescribed roles as wives and mothers. So I've given you here a series of books that she published in 1916. The furthest one on the right is called Hifz-e-Sehet, or the preservation of health. This actually included things like scientific drawings of human anatomy, home remedies for illnesses and accidents, advice to women on how they could maintain physical fitness through exercise and a balanced diet, and all sorts of things like that. So you can really see here how she was trying to share this kind of health knowledge with women. She also gave various speeches at the ladies' club. So there was lots of speeches on things like health and hygiene. So she sort of suggested that women had this particular responsibility to keep cleanliness in their homes, and through that kind of fight disease and plague within India at the time. And as I noted before, she also had this school for mothers where she taught the St. John's ambulance course, and therefore shared knowledge with women on things like first aid and home nursing and hygiene and gestation and things like that. She also, and I sort of hinted at this in the last section, initiated a process of professionalizing female health practitioners. So she introduced all sorts of training programs within Bhopal at this time to train nurses, midwives, and also indigenous health practitioners, or hakimas. And I've just given you an example of this on the screen with this. I think this is one of my favorite images of Bhopal at this time, where you can see this kind of selection of European women. And on the left of your screen, in the midst of them, you can see Sultan Jahan in her burqa. And this was on the establishment of the Lady Minto Nursing School, which was established in Bhopal in 1909 on the occasion of Lady Minto's visit. Yeah, so you can see here how she was trying to, I guess in some ways, draw on kind of colonial models, draw on colonial discourse around health and sanitation. But at the same time, she was always underpinning all of her endeavors with faith. And she did so by always kind of quoting the Quran and the Hadith to support her endeavors. She also always drew on Unani, which may be glossed as kind of Islamic medical practice. So as she said in one of her speeches on hygiene to the Ladies' Club, cleanliness is one of the chief factors of faith, or rather one half of the faith. And she went on to quote the Quran saying, "Verily God loves the penitent and the clean and pure." So we can see, I think, from this example, how she was kind of operating within an Islamic framework, even as she was referencing colonial discourses around kind of health and sanitation. Another area that she was very interested in was women's rights and duties. So she very much interpreted Islam as having given, and this was her words, she said it had come to the redemption of woman when she was in the lurch. And she said Islam provided more rights than any other religion that had come before to women. And so she wrote a number of books, including the one that you see on the left here. This is the English translation, of course, but I gave you the English translation because this book, it was published in 1916, but it was actually republished over and over again right up until the 1980s. And it was meant to be a kind of advice manual for newly married couples. So through the years, people have said to me, "Oh, yes, I received that when I got married," or whatever. And so in this book, it really talked about the rights that women had in Islam. So it talked about women's status in terms of female infanticide, in terms of polygamy, in terms of maintenance, in terms of inheritance, in terms of divorce. So really she was trying to kind of give a sort of interpretation of Islam that underlined the rights that women had within it. At the same time, she always recognized that even if men and women were equal before God, that they had separate spheres on earth. And I've kind of I've suggested that already, haven't I, by suggesting her kind of focus on women's place within the domestic sphere. I also just wanted to give this picture of the front of my book again as well, because I love I chose it because I love the image, but the image you see on the front of the book is actually a picture of Sultan Jahan at the All India Women's Conference meeting, which she presided over in 1928. And it shows her with her granddaughters, as well as various women's activists from the time. So nationalists like Sarojini Naidu and Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. And it kind of shows how she was very much involved in this idea of kind of fostering a sisterhood, if you like, of coming together with other women to fight for women's rights in India.
I'm going to jump in just for 1 second, Siobhan. Everyone, I urge you to get a hold of the book. That's you can see the cover there. Might be worth taking a screenshot, and it's published by Routledge. You can get it online and in, I would guess, most academic bookstores. So you will really, by reading it, you'll really be able to get a much more of an in-depth understanding, analysis of many of the areas that Siobhan has touched upon today. So Siobhan, just to let you know, it's 6 minutes past now. So
yes.
You know, it would be really wonderful if we can, obviously we are all loving your talk, but also it'd be really wonderful to get through as many questions and comments from the audience as we can. So do carry on.
Absolutely. Brilliant. I'll just round things up then. I had one other topic I had wanted to talk about was diet. And obviously I'm not going to have time for that, but that relates to my new project, which is, as I said, is on everyday eating. And for that project, I've been using some really interesting sources also written by Sultan Jahan, which talk about kind of how women should support the idea of a kind of healthy eating within the family. And these are some of the texts I've been working with. Some menus that I've been looking at. And also I thought it was interesting to note that Sultan Jahan also created this cookbook called Matbakh King George, the Kitchen of King George, where she really actually sought to kind of change the diets, if you like, of her subjects as well. But I'll round things up instead, and I will finish with this lovely picture of her late in life. I guess what I wanted to kind of argue, I suppose, in my work on Sultan Jahan is that she really was putting forward a particular version of modernism that was very sensitive to both religious and customary norms. And it was drawing on lots of influences. She was drawing on ideas she took from the colonial state. She was drawing from different reformist initiatives amongst Indian Muslims. And she was pulling them all together into her kind of own idea. And I really wanted to suggest too, I guess, that the princely context was really important to the reformist message and initiatives that she promoted. So on one hand, the princely states provides this kind of space, if you like, where facilitated by the autocratic structures of state, that she can develop new ideas, develop new institutions, and she could kind of try them out, if you like, before they were then promoted to other parts of India. And it also wanted to suggest that the semi-autonomy that she had, which was kind of inherent to the princely state system, meant it gave her this space where she could kind of negotiate with colonial models to the point that she would borrow ideas and so thoroughly and creatively adapt them that they almost seem to be not foreign at all, if you like. And I guess that means that Bhopal really comes into view as this site where women are not just objects of reform, but actually agents of change. And it really, one, challenges the image that is often portrayed of princely India as this kind of backward-looking space or remnant of the past, but it also, and of course this was very much the point of my talk today, points to the achievements of this woman, of Sultan Jahan, as a ruler and reformer. And I will draw it to a close there. So over to you, Shamim.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. What a fascinating insight into a truly remarkable woman and so many issues that she was involved in: education, health, women's rights. It's a plethora of issues that we can be discussing for hours. But I do now want to let the audience have their say and have their express their thoughts. But before they do that, I'm going to warm things up a little bit by asking a question of my own. So I'm going to ask you one question, and then we will take questions from the audience. I've got loads lined up. Now, she was obviously a very inspiring woman, and much of the issues that were close to her heart resonate very much today. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how history, of course, is not should not be seen in a vacuum. History has very many implications in the world that we live in. Given the current climate that we live in, many Muslims find themselves in, and in this case, I'm thinking about women in particular, certain stereotypes that are being brandished around the world about how we are and how we conduct ourselves. I would say that many of her much of her work is still very much resonates in today's world. Is that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things that that you find when you're a historian is you look at the world around you, don't you? And you kind of assume that I guess we've also been imbibed with this kind of idea of progress, haven't we? That things are moving forward in a way. And yet, very often, when as historians we look back into the past, we see that things haven't always been the way they are now. And that there's lots of kind of exemplars, if you like, in the past that we can draw from and use to kind of inspire practice and discussion and debates in the present. And I guess one of the things that's always kind of fascinated me in researching Sultan Jahan is how, you know, many of the debates and discussions not only are relevant today, but actually she was kind of putting forward ideas that you know are kind of, I don't know, even more advanced, if we want to put it that way, than we might see in certain parts. And I guess the way she was doing it by drawing on the kind of Islamic framework really, and they, you know, means they could be quite useful in a way, you know, could be kind of meaningful. It's a way that those debates can be kind of employed in lots of different contexts today, I guess.
And of course, many of the challenges that Muslim women during her time faced, sadly, Muslim women in our times are still facing. So her teachings are still as relevant as they were, you know, more than 120 years ago. Now, I'm going to say, I'm going to give a shout out to some people who have been telling me where they are tuning in from. So hello to Karen B, who is tuning in from Normal in Illinois in the US. In the USA. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen B. Katrina Trellogan, forgive me if I've misspelt that, but she's in Tasmania, Australia. So I don't know, I think it's nighttime in Australia now, isn't it? I think they're about 12 hours ahead of us. But lovely of you to join us, Katrina, and welcome. We've also got P. Farrat in Wales, beautiful Wales. So welcome, P. Farrat, for joining us. And then we've got Dipyaman Bonmik. Again, forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. And they're joining us all the way from Calcutta in India. And I think we have Ronnie in Bangladesh, Dhaka in Bangladesh. We've got Sophia in Tottenham in North London. And I think we've got Nadira in Ilford. So all four corners of the world, which is fantastic. Welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining this session. And we really hope that you've enjoyed it. Right, questions. So I've got one from Khalida Khan. This is interesting. Was she being pragmatic, or did she really support the British? That opens up my field.
It's always difficult. These are difficult questions, aren't they? Because it's
Yeah.
difficult to read into someone's mind, if you like. And I suppose as historians, we try not to do that. You know, we might conjecture or we might suggest possibilities, but it's difficult to know. I mean, I've sort of suggested, I guess, that she was a pretty pragmatic ruler, certainly in terms of the reforms that she brought about, that she was, you know, she had sort of ideas of how things should change, but she was also being very attentive to kind of conservative norms and everyday norms within Muslim communities at this time. Ultimately, I think I mean, we can't forget that this is an autocratic ruler whose status depended on a treaty that was signed with the British in the early part of the 19th century, and without the support of the British, that her rule and her state would not continue to exist. So I think, you know, she knew, as I said before, she knew which side her bread was buttered on, basically. And I think, you know, it was part of maintaining her rule and her status. And without that support, she would lose her position, basically. So yeah.
She was a true diplomat. She was a true diplomat. All right, I've got a question from Morag Cross. Hello, Morag. You've been very engaging in this session, and I really appreciate all your comments, and it's lovely to have you with us today. Morag asks, was there a contradiction between being veiled and being photographed? How did purdah and making images and being seen contradict each other? Brilliant question. And on that, I just want to add as well, because we know that she took a very, I suppose, a very traditional kind of conservative hard line on purdah in the early stages of her career. When I read the chapter on the veil, I discovered this, but she relaxed a whole lot more as she grew older and as her career developed, to the point where in the end, she was going out and about unveiled. So this is a very, very drastic change, and really gives us a fascinating insight into her kind of personal journey. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question. So thank you for that, Morag. Yeah, I found it when I was doing my research, and I kind of came across this personal journey, as you called it, where she went from being this kind of, you know, incredible advocate of purdah to the point of writing a book, Why Purdah is Necessary, to actually in the final years of her life, actually leaving purdah, actually. I found it really hard to kind of get my head around and kind of think, okay, how does this happen? I mean, she herself justifies that shift on the basis that by the final years of her reign, she was an older woman, and that there was no longer a kind of necessity for her to veil her beauty or that sort of thing. But she also talks about the fact that she was very much influenced by her young granddaughters. I showed the picture very early on of her three granddaughters, and the fact that in her view, times had changed, and that things had moved on, and therefore she could see that for them to have those freedoms and that independence was kind of important, I suppose. I think too, she very much had this idea that she had to show that it was possible, that you could be a good ruler behind the veil. And I guess by time she abdicates, she's made that point, hasn't she? And she moves on. But I agree with you, Morag. I think that kind of strange juxtaposition between, on one hand, always appearing in these imperial gatherings veiled, and yet producing these kind of press photos, if you like, if you want to call them that, which are intended for public consumption, which enable her to be even portrayed in the press in Britain, and that it's a really curious kind of juxtaposition. Yeah, I don't have an explanation for it, but it's an interesting observation for sure.
I mean, you know, the subject of the veil is such a complex topic, and it's something that, you know, scholars and academics have been debating for, you know, hundreds of years. And I think it would be a bit of a hard ask for you to kind of you know, reveal the kind of complexities behind it in a 2-minute response, but your answer was fascinating, so thank you for that. A very quick hello to Naima Han in Leeds in the UK. Hi Naima, thanks so much for joining us. Hanane or Hanain, forgive me if I have mispronounced the name, is asking, Siobhan, if you had the opportunity to meet Nawab Sultan Jahan today, what is the one question you would ask her about her life, leadership or legacy? And why is this question so important to you? Yet another brilliant question.
That is a great question. I love that. It's really funny that you asked that question, because we've always had this debate in my family of, like, if you had the chance just to travel back in time, where would you travel back to? And for me, it is, because this was the work I did for my PhD, it was the basis of my first book. All I could think was I would just love to travel back to Bhopal in the early 20th century and see what it was like. What does it really look like? You know, this period that I've written about, if you were actually living it. And what an amazing experience it would have been to meet Sultan Jahan herself. What question would I ask her? So many questions that I've had.
Oh, it's such a tough one. I mean, where would you even start?
Yeah, but in some ways, I think this one we've just been talking about, you know, that was one that really plagued me when I was writing this book and trying to make sense of it. Actually, no, I've got another one. One's just come back to me. One thing I didn't get to speak about today, which has always fascinated me, was the debate that there was over women's political rights. And of course, Sultan Jahan was the ruler of a state, and, you know, was held up, as I said right at the beginning, as the only woman ruler in India. And yet, when people contacted her and asked her to support women's suffrage, she refused to do so. And she said that she didn't think women should have the right to vote. And
Wow.
she was very much on the kind of conservative side of that debate that was happening. And indeed, when she went to Britain and she saw suffragettes on the street arguing for women's rights in Britain, she was appalled. And she said, oh my God, what are these women doing that they're, you know, standing up and embarrassing themselves in public in this way? And I guess she gave various explanations of why she was in support of women's rule, but not in support of women's having the vote. But I think I've just always found that really hard to understand. That I don't know, what seemed to me like they shouldn't have created those opposing opinions. So I think I would ask her that. What was her real thinking, her real understanding, and her feeling between making those what seemed to me opposing arguments?
She was clearly a very complex and contrary woman. And she was also, while she was pioneering, she was also a product of her time. And I think we need to take all of these things into consideration when we see these kind of holes in her personality or these unanswered questions. You know, this is, you know, she is the embodiment of many, many social, moral, religious, economic factors. So, and that's really what made her so fascinating. Now, we do have 7 minutes. And I intend to use every single second of that time. I've got a question from Sophia Jama. She's in Tottenham in North London. And she asks, what challenges did Sultan Jahan Begum face from within her court or society when implementing her progressive policies? How did she navigate the tension between tradition and reform? Yet another brilliant question.
Yeah, and a really important one. And I've tried to kind of hint at that a little bit as I've gone along, but let me give you maybe a little bit more explicit answer now. So there was definitely a lot of opposition to many of her ideas, particularly, you know, I talked about how she established the Sultania Girls' School in her state in 1903. And she really, when she established that school, she intended that all sharif or elite women noble women within the state, that all their daughters should attend that school. And she kind of put out a call to her nobles in the state, and she said, please send your daughters to my school. And there was like deathly silence. Nobody wanted to step up and send their daughters to school. So maybe some of those girls were being educated at home, but certainly they weren't leaving the house to go to education. And so it was at that point that she sort of has to think, okay, how do I actually make these things happen? And that's why I tried to kind of emphasize her sensitivity and also her pragmatism, that she was aware that there was these very kind of conservative views about female education in particular, but lots of her other ideas as well. And so she always tried to kind of be attentive to those kind of customary norms. And hence she, for instance, when she couldn't get anyone to attend the school, the first thing she did was she provided purdah conveyances, so veiled conveyances that would bring the girls from home to school, so that there was no worry that they would be kind of seen along the way. And this was very much a feature of women's education in the early part of the 20th century. So yeah, very much kind of attentive to this kind of conservative opinions and always trying to work with it. You know, she realized she couldn't push against it entirely. She had to work with it. And that's why I think everything she did was done in such a kind of incremental way.
Right, I think we are going to have to start wrapping it up there. I just want to say a very quick hello to Muhimin in Kashmir. Thank you so much, Muhimin, for joining us. And our thoughts and prayers are with you. Most of us are aware of everything that's been happening in Kashmir, and you are in our thoughts and prayers, and it's lovely that you can join us. Now, many people have been, first of all, I'm really sorry that I couldn't get through all the questions. They're all brilliant. And I just wish I had the time, but unfortunately we don't. But thank you so much, all of you, for participating. It's thanks to the audience that this has been such an energetic session. So we're very grateful to you for that. Many people are also asking if the session is going to be online. The answer is yes, it will be on YouTube. Apologies for the slight technical issues that we had at the beginning. I don't feel as though they made too much of a hindrance on our session. I think it's been a wonderful session. Thank you all for your patience. And yes, you will be able to see the entire session online. I'm not quite sure when it will be posted, maybe a day or so, but we can certainly find out and let you know. Well, you can go onto the MACFEST website, www.macfest.com, and you'll be able to find out more there. Some people were also asking where they can read all your works. So while we've got a few more minutes, Siobhan, if you can just very quickly give me the name of your website, and I'll write it into the chats, and then people can access it so that they can find out more about you and more about your works. So do you want to read that out to me very quickly?
I'm just going to find it for you. Yeah, I did just, I've lost the actual page. Oh no, there it is. Too many windows open all at the same time. So I'm just going to post my...
if you're able to, if you can put it in the chat, that will be better. If you can just copy...
I can only seem to send it to hosts and panelists, so maybe someone could forward it on. Yeah, I did just want to say, please do, if I didn't get a chance to answer your questions, and I can see some really fascinating ones in the chat today. So if I didn't get some, please don't hesitate to be in contact with me. I'm really easy to find as an academic. You can find my email address on my webpage. And if anyone is interested in any of my work as well, and they don't have access to it, then please, again, feel free to contact me, because I always like to share, if I can, to support people's knowledge and education.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Massive thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we can't wait to hear more about your next project. Also, just to remind everyone that the festival is running until July, so please visit the website www.macfest.com. The link is in the chat. You can download the brochure and explore all the other exciting events. My thanks to the incredible MACFEST team, especially CEO Sister Kaisra Shahraz, Katarzyna, and of course the audience. Your participation is what makes these events so successful. You know, something like, you know, it is so important in this climate. You know, really, Siobhan, you do a massive service to Muslim women all around the world through your research, and we are eternally grateful. And just on a final note, our thoughts and prayers to our Muslim sisters in Palestine. I think it's really important that we should mention that far from having these kind of opportunities, they are really trying to survive from day to day, and it would be remiss not to give them a quick mention. So we will continue our prayers for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and we will pray that their suffering ends soon and that they can find some peace. Thank you all once again for joining us. Assalamu alaikum, goodbye, and thank you all for joining us wherever you are in the world.
Thank you so much, Shamim, for great hosting. Thank you, Siobhan, for joining, for preparing such a great presentation. Ladies, you've made amazing duo today. Honestly, what a great conversation, and the topic absolutely fascinating. So for those of you who are artists or creatives based in the UK and you are a Muslim, so please go to MACFEST website, to Arts Awards page, take a look at that page. There is a free submission process. If you have anything you'd like to put in through the award submission process, please do. We have extended the deadline until mid-June. And we've got a couple events online coming up. Again, we've got next week on Wednesday, the youth event celebrating cultural heritage on Wednesday in the evening. We've got another online event, Ecological Wisdom of the Islamic Gardens of Paradise, Sunday, 25th of May. And then we've got Arabic travel writing and cultural discovery on Saturday, 31st of May. And in between, we've got a couple of workshops and events in Greater Manchester, live events, and they are all listed on Eventbrite. So thank you very much for today. The event has been recorded. It's already on Facebook. If you would like to go back to MACFEST Facebook page and see the very beginning, that's available right now. Thank you.
Thank you from me as well. A reminder to our attendees, if you have missed the first part for some reason, it's all on Facebook. Do go back to it. And what can I say, Siobhan? My goodness, this is your second session with us for MACFEST. You're absolutely brilliant. For people who are listening, we had another session with Siobhan on Muslim women travelers, and we celebrate International Women's Day with that book. Please do go back and discover that book, and also find her a presentation on our YouTube a year or two ago. I knew when I saw this book of yours, I knew I wanted to host you for MACFEST. Absolutely brilliant. Feast in every way: history, women, gender, creativity, a true celebration. And then brilliant hosting by Shamim. My goodness, what a twosome you made. I can't believe it. Both of you absolutely brilliant in every way. I'm so thrilled to have put you two together. Siobhan, would you agree? It was fantastic, wasn't it?
Absolutely fantastic. Shamim, you did a wonderful job.
It really, when you're doing these kind of things, the person you're talking to really makes a big difference, you know, in terms of the chemistry and the energy. And I really felt we
had a lot of energy.
Absolutely.
And remember everyone who was there, who they were, you personalized the whole thing. I can't say you are now fixed with MACFEST, let's say. Inshallah. Okay, so thank you to everyone for giving us your Sunday. And we'll meet you soon with another wonderful panel. And if you like music and you're in Greater Manchester, please join us for the live musical day at the Lowry Centre with a Moroccan group and a Pakistani woman. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Shamim. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.